Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with you all, and I'd just like to acknowledge the Whadjuk people, traditional owners of the Perth region, before I give you a bit of a summary of the work that Bush Heritage does in Western Australia. So I am based in Geraldton myself, so I live up there and work out of the great regional city that is Geraldton. I have a small team of people that work out of a shared office space called City Hive. Before that I was living out in the bush on one of our conservation reserves, and I guess what I would like to just hopefully share with you today is the overwhelming positivity that I feel and that I see out in the country and with the people that I work with. I have the privilege of working for a non-government organisation, but we work very closely with government and value our partnership with all levels of government and with the resource and agricultural sector. However, Bush Heritage Australia, starting 30 years ago down in Tasmania, was formed by a small group of people who were worried about what the future held. They were worried about a patch of land being cleared that had special meaning to them, and they decided to band together and do something about it. They basically remortgaged their homes, and Bob Brown, who many of you would know, spent an amount of money he received from an environmental award for his work on the Franklin River. And they put all that together and they bought a block of land. And they protected it, and Bush Heritage now owns that block of land, and that's called the Liffey Reserve down there in Tasmania. It was the block of land where Bob spent a lot of his time as a Greens senator thinking and pondering about the policies and the movements that needed to be activated in this country to make it more sustainable and to look after our ecology. So Bush Heritage is now nearly 30 years old, with 100 staff around Australia that are equally as passionate about the environment and its restoration and its care as all of you, I'm sure. And we raise $20 million a year, every year, from people that live in Perth, Geraldton, Darwin, in Tasmania, Hobart, Sydney, Melbourne, Benalla, that dip into their pockets to support conservation work that we all believe in, that you're all part of, and it's growing. We've got a target of reaching $30 million in the next 5 years of private money to invest back into ecology and partnerships with Aboriginal people and pastoral groups. And there's other groups like us that are doing equally important work at an equal scale. So you've got Australian Wildlife Conservancy, you've got Greening Australia, you've got a whole lot of state-based trusts that are doing excellent work as well. So, and these are just organisations that are doing practical on-ground work, not to mention all the other environmental charities and not-for-profits that are doing important advocacy work as well. So our vision is healthy country protected forever. And that connects to the Aboriginal meaning of country, and which I'll talk more about later, but as a predominantly white Anglo conservation organisation, the way our organisation has evolved to build relationships with Aboriginal Australia and to take their leadership and their knowledge into our programs is something that I'm personally very proud of, and think that is critical that all conservation groups do that. We can't be successful in Australia in terms of managing land in the country without having deep relationships with the traditional owners, and I'll explain that a bit later. And our purpose on a day-to-day basis is to return the bush to good health. This is where we work, so this is where our donor money is invested each year, and we have a variety of different landscapes that you can see. So we don't just randomly buy land wherever there's a good purchase opportunity. We have these areas identified, say in Western Australia as the Kimberley, the Central Desert part of the world, the Western Rangelands there, and down here in the southwest part of the state. We also work in the arid rangelands of South Australia, down in Tasmania, where I spoke about earlier. That's where the organisation was born, and in some of the cleared landscapes in Victoria, and obviously up in Cape York and several areas in the Brigalow belt of Queensland. All those areas are different in terms of their community dynamics, in terms of the ecological pressures they face, but we've chosen to work in those areas because in most cases, not all, but in most cases, they're underrepresented in the National Reserve System, or the level of protection for those particular communities, ecological communities, is not as good as we think it should be. So we prioritise our areas of focus, and we have staff in all of those areas. Our head office is in Melbourne, so we have an office in Collins Street in Melbourne, which is a great centre of activity where our sort of fundraising team work, and they're a great, passionate group of people who try to develop our messages to connect with donors around Australia. We have our finance and corporate services there. Our CEO, Heather Campbell, is based down there in Melbourne. But one thing about Bush Heritage is that we really want to keep people in the regional areas, in the rural areas where we do our work. It's really important to us that we, through our conservation work, don't clear the landscape, that we keep populating the landscape to have more influence. So we want to see our role next to farming and mining, conservation, but you can't do that unless you've got people in the landscape. And so having, for example, we've got, which one is again? That one, Hamlin Station there, which is one of our more recent acquisitions in Western Australia on the edge of the Shark Bay World Heritage Area. We've got 6 staff out there, and I know that there's other conservation reserves up in the Kimberley that have 10, 20 staff, but it's fantastic when you get that makeup of conservation professionals coming to live in the bush and engaging with the local community. And on all of these reserves, we've got staff that are out there managing land, building relationships with the local community, and spreading the message that we've got to look after country, and that doesn't have to be a battle. It can be something we do together, and that most people, 99% of people, want that. But somehow it gets clouded in the political messaging and the divisions that are often exploited. But in my experience, I've worked in pretty remote areas, and areas that you'd say would be maybe redneck. The majority of people care for the land. They want to look after it. They're inspired by it. So I just think that what we all are part of is incredibly unifying, and we can't get too upset about the political machinations that happen, and we need to get together like these kind of forums and share our passion and our knowledge for what's going on. One of the great projects that I thought I'd just share with you today, and I acknowledge Blair from Greening Australia, his team have also been a big part of this project, but given the focus of this forum being on restoration and practitioners, I thought this would be a good project to talk about. It's down in the Fitzsterling region. We have 7 properties down there, and we've recently just built a field station, which we're very proud to have down there, which was funded by Lotteries West and a private donor. Your open invitation to any practitioners if you ever want to run a workshop or a field day down in the Fitzsterling region. We have a wonderfully designed field station that can sleep up to about 18 people and has a beautiful vista over the restored country that we're working on. But about 20 odd years ago, there was a movement, a group of people that developed the Gondwana link concept, which many of you would be aware of. And we're only one small part of that project, but this is an important part. We have 7 properties in that area between the Fitzgerald River National Park and the Stirling Range National Park. And what we're doing down there with other partners like Greening Australia and the Biosphere community down there and Landcare is connecting up those 2 national parks so that animals can move between those amazing national parks that are run by the department and are incredibly important reserves. But we want it, it's fragmented, it's a highly fragmented landscape. It's a global biodiversity hotspot, as you would all know, and the species richness is incredible. So by connecting up those areas where we're allowing species to flourish, and I'll give some examples of exactly what that means. But we just didn't, once again, we just didn't buy properties that came up and then start planting 1 or 2 things. We had a detailed landscape plan developed by sometimes by EIANZ staff and in conjunction with other consultants, private consultants that we regard highly. Did a really good plan on using the Conservation Action Planning process, which is an international standard, and developed a plan of where we wanted to buy and why we wanted to buy. And then now we're at the point of going, well, we're not going to be able to buy everything because there's farmland that's incredibly valuable and families want to hold that and grow their businesses. So how do we work with them, and how do we further secure those areas of biodiversity without buying land? And so that could be models of stewardship where we support farming families to better look after the remnants that are on their bush. And we do that down in Tasmania. So Bush Heritage in the Central Highlands of Tasmania works with pastoral families who are never going to sell their amazing properties because they're generations old, they're very deeply connected to them. However, they want to protect the grassy box woodlands that are there. And so they've sort of gone, well, no one's going to encourage us or advise us or reward us for doing that. We'll just do what we've always done because it's easy and it makes sense to us as graziers. But Bush Heritage and the Tassie Land Conservancy came along and said, hey, what you've got is really valuable there, those grasslands. There's only like 2% left in the world. We're going to help you identify where they are, work out what the management practices are, like what Richard was talking about earlier with the ESRM planning, and we're going to pay you to look after them. And that's the money that our donors give us, so it's not like we have to apply for a government grant. We've got donors that love that kind of partnership, and to see money flowing from their pocket into an environmental charity to then hit the producer's pocket to protect grasslands is fantastic. So that's something that I hope we can think about more as land becomes scarcer in this particular part of the world. We're seeing honey possums come back into restored areas. So this isn't all just fun and games for restoration practitioners to keep busy. This is delivering really, really exciting results. And so these are old wheat paddocks. We've got malleefowl nesting after 7 years on a property called Monjabuk North. To see that was just outstanding, and we've got imagery of the chick hatching from that now. We've put remote cameras on it, and Angela Sanders, our ecologist down there for many years, has been keeping a close eye. So you can only imagine what the feeling is like with our staff and our community of supporters and the community down in that part of the world who see those bits of bush protected, staff being employed to look after them, and then to see wheat paddocks be returned to this kind of diversity where previously those paddocks were blowing away. And I'm not saying that all paddocks down there are blowing away, but these ones were, and they weren't in a productive farming system. So we're really excited about this. I'll get back to that in a second. So I guess in terms of our reserves, we have 36 reserves around Australia. That's what Bush Heritage is known for, is buying land and protecting it. And we have a whole lot of planning tools and great ecologists and landscape planners and managers that make all that happen. And I could talk for hours about each of our different reserves, but fundamentally, I think there's another important thing to talk about with you all, and that is the relationship that we have as environmentalists and environmental practitioners with Aboriginal Australia. And I have the privilege of working with many Aboriginal staff in my team. We've got a great team of people and also Aboriginal board directors to help Bush Heritage come from a point of view of we need to conserve this and protect this because it's got a particular value, to really trying to understand and embrace the Aboriginal perspective on this country, and to work side by side with Aboriginal groups to care for country, to use both scientific Western approaches but also their deep connection to knowledge and culture. And there's a few examples of how this has been a really meaningful journey for Bush Heritage, and how I think it's something that all conservation groups and government should continue to strive to do. So we work with a lot of traditional owners in Western Australia. This is Rita Cutter. She's based out of Wiluna. And the knowledge that she's given to us in terms of management of the night parrot and management of the bilby, in terms of management of fire regimes out there in the Birriliburu Indigenous Protected Area, is profound. And she's now involved in threatened species committees, and the group of scientists that are based out of Canberra and convene these kind of meetings are now actively, through Rita and other leaders, engaging with those traditional owners in their discussions around how we manage endangered species. It's not just one person's conversation. There's got to be a group of people around the table. But and our donors are so proud that Bush Heritage is taking the step, and it was a risk and it has its challenges, there's no doubt about it. Working in partnership with any group is more complicated than doing your own work at your own pace with your own staff. As you go into partnership because you can achieve more, because what you can do together is greater than what Bush Heritage can do on its own reserves, or what the Birriliburu traditional owners, they don't want to work with Bush Heritage because we're fun or just because it's a nice thing to do. They want to work with us because we can give resources, we can provide support for what they believe in, we can provide them with access, and so it works both ways. We have an amazing project up in Ramangini, which is a partnership with CSIRO, Charles Darwin University, the Arafura Swamp Rangers, which is about 10 canoes kind of country that many people might remember from the movies, and the Olcala Aboriginal Corporation in Cape York. And that's looking at not just why we want to monitor and evaluate our projects, but how do our Aboriginal communities that have healthy country plans, and are doing lots of great sea country, land country work, how do they evaluate their programs so it's meaningful for them? Not just for bush heritage who want to see improvements in vegetation quality or species diversity, but how do we get a monitoring tool that works for both cultures? And that's well underway, is really exciting. And people are responding to this, government are responding to it, donors, big philanthropic donors want to see more of this work. And the issue we've got in bush heritage, and I'm sure other NGOs do as well, it's not about the lack of money, it's about the lack of coordinated ideas and the people to deliver, because there's a lot of interest in the work that we're all part of. But getting our ideas on the paper, having properly structured projects, is what we need to be doing more of. 5 minutes, great. Is that your question time? Right. So this is Gareth, and he's doing burning programs, and we do a lot of burning in large parts of the state, and that's to create mosaics, and many of you would be familiar with that kind of eco-burning, and there's complexities around that. We have ecologists that are question some of the burning we do with Aboriginal partnerships, but that's healthy and that's fine. We just deal with that, but all I know is it's better than having big wildfires burn through 2 million hectares of spinifex and creating a desert. So we just got to learn as we're going, and seeing people like Gareth do his work and be proud and get out of Wiluna and just see the impact that conservation land management work can have on old people, young people, developing people is just profound. And I think that's one of the best things about our sector, is that we can find that common ground. This is up in Clumbaroo with Woonabulgumba country, so we do a big fire walk every year, and the rangers lead the way, and they burn country, and they take kids out and talk about their stories. This is Woonabulgumba country, so Fitzroy Crossing, where we're working with the rangers there to kind of support their development. They've got a very complex situation going on there with Geeky Gorge and Windjina Gorge and all these amazing national parks. They've got a ranger program they want to develop. They've got pastoral stations. They've got all these opportunities. But how do they all come together so that everyone benefits? And it's a really complex situation, but with good people, you can often find pathways. And I guess the final thing I'll talk about before I take any questions, and very happy to do that, is that working with Aboriginal people doesn't just happen. It's not something, it's like any group, and it's something you've got to deeply believe in, and you've got to support your organisation to do well. And you've got to have Aboriginal leadership where possible. So Bush Heritage have got a cultural competency framework that has been evolving and developing over the years. But we really see this as one of our key points of difference, and we hope that it doesn't become a point of difference, but at the moment we feel it is, that there's a lot more scope for conservation and government agencies to do better with how we work with Aboriginal people, because it aligns so nicely with who they are and what we're on about. It's all about looking after country and looking after each other. So having a framework that talks about what it is, cultural competency is a distinct but cumulative relationship between awareness and sensitivity and practice. And when you work in a sector, you forget that doesn't always happen easily, and it's got to happen through communications, through experiences. So I just hope that all of you continue to think about this in your work. This one. Oh, cut off. I've got to show the start. Is that your name? Yeah, we're hopefully in the next little while, so we have Aboriginal staff. That's been a really key part of us moving forward. We've got Aboriginal board membership, and also now working on Aboriginal executive, so having Aboriginal people at the executive table. And I can only, from my experience, I've been leading a program with the Aboriginal engagement program, but I need to get off my plate urgently, because it's ready to be led by others. But the amount of times you have to keep reminding staff in the communications department, who are really smart people and who really have done cultural competency training, that in the newsletter, when we talk about that we own Hamlin Reserve, we've got to say Hamlin Reserve on Mulgana country. It's those simple little things. It's amazing how long it takes for it to sink in. Our program is led by Sissy Gore-Birch, who's here. Sissy lives in Kununurra, and many of you may know her. She's a great leader, and we've got a range of amazing women. They're all women, really, who have led this program. And Sarah down there in Tasmania is an Aboriginal woman, and Chantal Bellotti out of Geraldton. So we've been fortunate to attract some good staff, and I think you've got to work at attracting good staff. You've got to keep them by being flexible and wanting to develop them in their way. So and we've learned a lot from those people. And I think I better leave it there. But that's just a bit of the cultural competency. The individual side of things, the organisation, having the right policies. For us, that means we're going to have policies that allow traditional hunting on our reserves. How do you do that? That's quite a big deal for an organisation where you've got conservation properties. And how do you manage that? How do you manage access? It's not always easy, but you have to work it through. And if you don't have policies that are clear, you'll have variation across the nation. And one person will do this because they've got a good relationship with a traditional owner group, and another reserve will do this, and it's just not going to work. And then professional development. So we have really invested in training. And I think really that's it. That's the view across Whitewell Station, or Charles Darwin Reserve as we call it, looking out across Mount Singleton or Ningarn. And I just think there's a lot to be excited about, a lot of positive things going on out there. I know it gets tough at times, but I wish you all the best, and thanks for listening.
I think that was a great presentation.
Thanks for having me today. How are we doing? Everyone hear me all right? Nope. That way, about there. Take it off, hold it. School for the gifted. Alright, now I can sing and dance with the best one. For those that don't know me yet, my name is Guy Boggs. I've been with the WA Biodiversity Science Institute now for about almost 3 years. Last time I talked, I did a show of hands. Who's heard of Watson? I did believe they came up this morning, so that's good. So we're in the spirit of collaboration. It was recognised, it's been recognised for quite a long time now, that there can sometimes be a tension between our science community and our management agencies and our government partners. And WABSI has been set up to try and bring a more collaborative way in which science is undertaken in Western Australia, to ensure that some of the biodiversity science that's happening is actually addressing some of the sustainable development challenges and goals that we have. So that title of WABSI is divided into 4 theme areas. One is around information management, which we've been making some great progress there in terms of collating and bringing together data sets across the state and building that base. Denise Drew down here heads up our biodiversity survey program now, and that's looking at more coordinated ways that we can undertake surveys in the future. And then there's our threats and processes node, which is led by Bruce Webber from the CSRO, and I look after restoration in situ conservation. So essentially we're looking at the fundamental information that we need to make good decisions for biodiversity and sustainable development. And then in our programs we're looking at managing the types of activities that we take as human or exist in our environments, managing in a way that actually produces the outcomes that we're after. In my space, restoration, the 2 areas of primary work that I'm working on is around mining rehabilitation. The other area is around the southwest agricultural landscapes. Those of us who've been in WA for a long time, the southwest ecological hotspot is there because we have amazing biodiversity, but unfortunately also because we have so many threats to it, including such widespread land clearing. So we've had a long history now of investment at a national level in trying to restore some of those biodiversity values. I like to say I'm a child of the decade of land care. I'm a child, I'm not young. I grew up as a teenager with my parents having a block in York, and being a really active member of our land care community through the 90s. And now I go back and I spent a lot of my career in the academic world and then coming back into the natural resource management world. And going back and saying, okay, all of these years of investment that we've had in improving our environment, are those activities actually achieving what we thought they were going to achieve? And do we have a good understanding of how we're implementing the management actions, what the response is likely to be? This was interesting, there's Kington's in the order here, but one of the things that in my last job with natural resource management, we looked at regional scale natural resource management plan. We set up, this drove the development of a resilience-based strategy that identified key thresholds of potential concern for our region that said, look, if you pass this sort of threshold with amount of remnant vegetation or these sorts of patch sizes, there's going to be a system change. And then we've set up a dashboard behind that actually looked at, well, what are some of the drivers the net changes and the drivers sitting behind them. So net area of vegetation, we've had people map that over time. We also used to get really good data on the amount of planting activity and seedlings. Green Australia has contributed to that data set. And we got areas on the flip side of looking at areas that are permitted for, and what we saw was all this amazing work that was going on in terms of community groups getting out there to restore and revegetate their systems, pretty much offset by the amount of clearing permits happening in the region. So there was no net gain. And so there's a lot of effort, a lot of investment, and it wasn't achieving the outcome that we wanted. And that's just at a broad scale. Then going back to, we've all seen it, and we see it across mining rehabilitation. Alcoa is suffering from it now, past rehabilitation practices, not necessarily delivering the outcomes that we're after now. So it's put me on path to this role to say, we're an organisation that's meant to build robust science to underpin management decision making. One of the projects that I've come across very early on was a project that CSIRO undertook only in the last few years to inform the federal government on this current National Land Care Program investment. What they asked them to do is, it was actually meant to be establish a knowledge bank for all the practitioners out there about different management actions they can put into place and what the evidence base looks like to demonstrate that management intervention actually did have the ecological outcome that we were looking for. And they went round and they looked at the types of things that we do as practitioners, rehabilitation activities, fire management activities, wildlife management activities, weed management activities, broke them down into the specific types of actions that we might undertake that way. And then they looked to find the evidence that those management actions did deliver the outcomes that we're after. And it's a good point to stop here and think about what does evidence actually look like. And in this space, we do a lot of work in theory. I was taught remote sensing GIS for a long time. I did a lot of spatial modelling, lots of predictive modelling. I can tell you what I theorise is going to happen. But often the data sitting behind that is not very strong. So when you look down for real empirical evidence that is discoverable within the context of this project, so CSIRO just did a desktop review. One, it raises that question as practitioners, what does evidence look like? The research community only considers evidence a peer-reviewed publication. That's possibly part of the challenge. Sometimes putting my researcher hat on in the practitioner community, we see changes and we assume relationships, and therefore we assume they're fact when they're not. And we actually we need to, as practitioners, look for real hard evidence. And at the moment, that largely does sit in using the traditional science mechanisms to try and understand it. When they did this review, they came back and across all those management interventions that they put in place, they looked at, they said, wow, look, there's 15,000 papers you published on it. Of course, this has been researched to death. Bloody scientists have been going out there again, they're spending more time and energy to tell us what to do. But when you dug down into those papers, very few of them actually showed a causal link between the management intervention and the outcome. So they might have said, okay, well, look, we have reported evidence here, say, on feral cat management, on how they went about actually making an effective management decision to control that invasive species. Yes, they control it, but they haven't made an evidential link back to the response that they were expecting from that invasive species. When you looked for data that talked to that, there were only a few hundred papers. Why does this happen? We all deliver projects in this area. projects are usually a few years in their running. These sorts of responses take a long time. The activities that I was taking out as a teenager, planting trees all over the wheat belt, I'm only starting to see now what some of that response might be. Luke talked about some of the mallee fowl coming back into the planting some there. That's 7 years still. It's still a long time frame. And goodness for organisations like Bush Heritage like that actually can do long-term studies. What we lack in this space is long-term studies. And all the monitoring and evaluation we do are usually within projects, within short-term scopes. So, the other thing that came out of their review of all this work was, okay, that's great. When you pull it up and you want to look at, as you know, if I'm a Commonwealth government agency, a state government agency deciding on what sort of management interventions to invest in, and you want to make some sort of synthesis of all the knowledge out there, the studies, the methods used were so diverse that it actually makes it very hard to collate that knowledge into a collective and shared understanding of what was going on. Even when there were reasonably good data sets. So for example, excessive grazing and clearing native vegetation and changed hydrology, there actually was some really good work around there, but it was so diverse it was very hard to bring it together. And where there were reports of relationships, this concept of partial effectiveness is the rule, where they sort of showed that there was a partial effect of the management intervention on ecological outcome they were looking for. So that's sort of the context for one of the initiatives I'm really trying to drive with WATSI and nationally with the colleagues that are on this presentation from universities around Australia and particularly the CSIRO. We see practitioners playing a really important part in trying to help us set up a national series of experiments that are embedded into the work that we do, where we're actually practitioners out there doing work on ground, on country, to test some of the ideas and some of the key questions that we have. In particular, this embedded experiment model came out of the climate adapted revegetation question. So should we use local provenance, or should we be going and taking provenances or even whole species that are more fitting to projected climate change? That's a really topical issue for a lot of people out there delivering programs. There's lots of rules on how you use provenance, seed provenancing in the way in which you collect seed and use it in revegetation. But there's lots of questions out there that haven't quite been resolved yet. Every time we do a revegetation project, we're building an experiment. We're planting particular plants from a particular location in a particular way, and we're expecting a long term. There's a real opportunity to embed experiments into those, and there's this concept of network science. So that diagram came out of a paper that one of the contributors to the initiative we're working on published, which was talking about taking local experiments, networking them at a regional scale, networking them at a national scale, and then networking them at a global scale to really provide some sort of global understanding of broader ecological change and how we manage ecological change in the face of, say, climate change. And that's really where we're going with this initiative. So firstly, what is an embedded experiment? This is one of the projects that the 20 million trees funded with CSIRO and Green Australia here, where CSIRO basically worked with Green Australia to say, well, look, we just want to test two provenancing strategies. When you're doing your revegetation, can you please track them? Make sure you've got very good records on the two different seeding plans. We'll work with you on the experimental design, and that question of climate adjusted provenancing versus local provenancing could be looked at. Those sites, in terms of the types of responses we're looking for, are going to be recorded over a long time. The fact that those sites are being set up in a particular way with a rigorous experimental design and the data sets are collated means that we actually can network them into a broader suite of studies and go back to the future. So that's why we need a new acronym. So here's PERI, the Platform for Ecological Restoration Research Infrastructure is what we're trying to develop. We're looking at developing a pilot in WA. And what it consists of, we go straight, as a practitioner, as a scientist, with my scientist hat on, we go straight to the sites, including how we might design and monitor those sites on the ground. But of course, the starting point in this space is what are the real questions that we've got here? So that work, that foundational work that CSIRO did around understanding what the evidence base looked like, sets up some really pointy questions that we could look at. But I know as practitioners, as people involved in projects, we want to be able to talk with them and say, well, when you're undertaking a project, what are the things that really are of interest to you, or maybe are challenging you in the way in which you undertake work? We'd like to see that as again, other parts. So I really take that through a very rigorous and analytical way in which you develop the question. Getting the question right is just as important as trying to get the answer. Of course, then there's this concept of experimental portal. So if anyone has worked with State NRM at the moment now, they have a grid-based reporting system that you're meant to report on project outputs. That's a system that could actually be used to track and embed and record some of the information that might be collated as part of an embedded experimental system. And then there's actually an implementation of this on-ground experiment. If these systems are done in a reasonably rigorous way, they don't have to all be done in one single project, in one single time frame. There's an opportunity for practitioners or management agencies to say, well, actually, we have an interest in that climate-adjusted provenancy. We're working with EIANZ or EIANZ on a revegetation project, working with rehabilitating row 8 at the moment. There's a question that comes up for the group in that. Why don't we design an experiment where we look at provenancy? Test that's embedded in that site. It's designed in the same way. So that experiment that's done in the row 8 rehabilitation can be networked with the rehabilitation undertaken in a mining company or rehabilitation undertaken by a natural resource management agency or breeding firm. And there's a lot more power that comes from networking those experiments, and also a lot more flexibility because you don't have to do it in one single project. Okay, and importantly again in this space is where WOTC tends to sit. We see siloing between science and practice, and we want that to break down. What I love about pairing is this actually puts part of the responsibility for guiding the science that's done back into your hands, because you're raising the questions. What questions do you want scientists to actually look at? We need central oversight. Obviously, there's an administration of something, a system like that. We need network leaders. So in this case, we're talking about, say, the provenancy question. Another node was people were really interested in the interaction between fire and grazing. One that's come up. So we'll set up nodes around these core questions. And then it's really important that practitioners and the managers who are actually involved in implementing the projects take ownership of the experiments themselves, and then science community are there to help with monitoring design and make available people to be involved in future analysis. We can also breaks down the reliance on big budget projects. We can use students and other things. Examples of questions are being put forward. What the provenance and strategies work? Do mycorrhizals actually improve revegetation outcome? How does native macrobiotic grazing interact with livestock grazing? The old kangaroo problem seems to be high on the list at the moment. So where we are at in the process, we're still really early on. We're really testing whether this concept would work. The first stage was to write some guidelines. We're producing some national guidelines at the moment. It has advice on why embedded experiments are valuable, the science behind those experiments, how you might go and plan and design one, implementing it into your project. It's got to fit into project management systems, and dare I say, a lot of scientists don't understand project management. And I learned that in my last role very clearly. I didn't know it. Monitoring and baseline standards, science partnerships, and how you actually manage those partnerships effectively, and then, of course, some guidelines around data storage and ethics. And we're hoping that those guidelines will both be available later this year. And really, as I said, where we're going now, particularly through WOTC, is I think this is a really clever initiative at a national level. We're hoping to work with the federal government around getting support for it at a national level. But I think one of the things that we need to do is look at how, the realities of how something like this might be implemented through some pilot work. And so we are working to get some support to run a process where we're actually identifying big questions. We ran workshops at the end of last year with all the NRM regions and other groups to start that process. And we're talking to other groups like State NRM or Lotteries West about how we might actually go about setting up a framework for Western Australia that would be supportive of herring, like a node of herring that we could actually then contribute into a national system we built up together. Yeah, I'd say acknowledge that work was all funded by the Australian government up to energy at the time through SIRO, and then the work that we've been doing. There's that knowledge bank of management effectiveness is a report that's available, and there's a discussion paper on Perry that we've written as well. That's as good as we want.
Thank you.
Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners. I thought that welcome to this morning was pretty special. That'll be a highlight for later days.
Microphone.
Sorry. Is this one? Is that all right?
No, I think it's off.
I definitely killed it, sorry.
How's that?
Yeah, you.
Right. I know you're looking up there and you're going, what's few tins of paint got to do with what we're doing? Well, we've just recently, only a few weeks ago, been taken over by Tronox. We worked previously Crystal Mining, and we got a new template system we had to use, and this is it. So, and quite definite that was what we had to do. So I guess the message there is that's the end product, or one of them. For anyone else who's planning a hip replacement or a knee or something like that, we'll be a friend there as well, because titanium's the other product. So it's not brought to you by Dulux, it's just us. So what I want to do today is just run you through our project with Widenup site, which was mined for mineral sands. Really just a bit of a brief overview of what it is and how we go through our processes and what we end up with, and maybe a little bit about our culture and our thinking as to how we go about rehabilitating. I guess the big thing is with us, we've always got a plan, and our type of mining is a short lifespan mine, so we have the opportunity. We don't just start mining and then at the end of it have a think about how we're going to fix it up. We have a plan probably 5 years out from the start, and it's called an integrated rehabilitation and mining plan. So the emphasis on rehabilitation. So prior to any start, we gather all the data, we work out what the hazards are that are going to stop us from having successful rehabilitation, and we manage or eliminate those issues. And then the mining comes into it, so we mine around those issues. So we develop our mine plan to work so we get the best rehabilitation outcome, not the other way around. I guess what it does, it also commits us to a series of processes and things that we do within the mine, and everybody in the mine is aware of it. So the miners, it's not just the environmental department and the mining department, two separate things, we're both working together. Just to give you a little bit of background on us, we've been mining mineral sands in the southwest since 1956. We're based in Bunbury. We're originally Cable Sands and obviously now Tronox. We've had operations from Maruna to Jangada on the south coast near Black Point. We've successfully mined and rehabilitated in that time 17 of 21 sites. Currently, we're mining one site, which is 1,100 hectares, just 8 kilometres out of Busselton. And in that site, we have 165 hectares of river system, which we have to as an offset. It's all farmland, but there are these Sabina and Abba River flowing through it, so that's what we're currently operating on. And we've done about 30% of that. The 3 remaining sites, they're all currently, rehabilitation is completed. That's Ludlow, Jangada and this one here, and they're going through the process of relinquishment. The Gwynton up north side is 3.5 kilometres south of Boyna. It's right on the edge of the Witches Scarp. It's a total of 240 hectares. It was all originally farmland, and then it became blue gums. There's about 20 hectares of scattered degraded remnants within it, which were cleared. Mining took place from 2008 to 2012, and right through the middle of the site, we put 72 hectares of native re-veg back in. It was Jarramarry woodland, banked the woodland, and mainly it was a swampland or a recreated wetland. When we were setting up and doing our planning, we came up with these major end goals. We wanted to establish a sumpland and a wetland through the centre of the site. And we worked on the Peter Andrews theory where we slowed the water down. Didn't stop it or hold it in, we just slowed it and kept it there longer. Through that wetland, we wanted to establish a riparian vegetation cover along that, and fauna habitat and revegetation. So in there was a lot of logs put in, ponds created in that site, and then the installation of the fences so the native vegetation and the farming can coexist, because this property is rehabilitated into farmland and native veg. And all of the native veg, as it was rehabilitated, was in separate. So what we did, we linked it all together, and in the end, all the rehabilitated land on the site is actually linked together, and then it links to 1,000 hectares of state forest adjacent. And lastly, all of that land that we rehabilitated in native land was put into conservation covenant. We just got the final paperwork on that the other day, so that's been achieved. Just on this one here, this is actually an overview of the site, and I'll just point a few things out. So obviously topsoil management was quite important, so just around the edges we've got all that topsoil, and in the middle, then overburden, because this mine, most of the pits are 20 metres deep, so mineral was down 20 metres before we actually started mining, so we're able to take the soil off in layers. The process creates clay fines, so they all have to be dried before they can be put back into the ground. Here's the indication here of the depth of the pits. There's one there and one there. All the water that was on it, traditionally this was the head of the Geneva Brook. So water traditionally flowed through there, so we had to capture that water, any water that was coming through, capture it, divert it and clean it, and then put it back. Just here is a little patch of rehab which we did as a trial, and it was a failure. And the reason was the mining guys, when they did their earthworks, they put it back and they put the wrong thing underneath. So that was a really good lesson to learn early in the piece to get the message across how important it is that we follow the procedure. And press the wrong button. And just through here is, this is the remnant veg that was kept, and these were all linked with the new stuff, which we'll see in the end. And just, we've diverted roads, this one here, that was mined through, and along here as well. And at the end of this, we're going to test the technology. We've got a drone flyover, and just as a bit of context, we're going to actually go, it's going to go from here through there and out the other end. Mining is a dry mining process. We don't use a dredge. There's no chemicals involved, it's just all water and gravity. I guess our challenges for us were recreating the soil profiles. We had 6 different soil profiles over this site which had to be put back exactly as they came out. There was also considerable underwater ground flows which could have impacted anybody downstream from us. We had a lot of really high value agricultural land at the bottom end of our mine. If we were to interrupt those subsoil water flows, that would really impact their summer wetlands. Like everybody who does any rehab, roos and rabbits are your enemy. Weeds, it's old established farmland, so it's just full of all sorts of things that want to get you. The site has a 17 metre fall from the top to the bottom, so erosion was a real consideration we had to work on, and drainage was a major key in the planning. Just here we've got these are the different soil profiles we've had to recreate. These two are the middle of the key ones. This is the wetland one here, and that, we had to have a clay base in it to hold the water up and let it flow in the direction it was meant to. And we had organic sand as opposed to Bassendean sand up in the higher slopes. These other ones, they're what we ended up in the pastures, and they're mostly clays. I guess, key factor in all of this is the people that do the work and that are responsible. And for anyone who knows anything about our operation, this is a really rare picture because that guy's smiling. You can't see that very often. The big, like I said before, the key to all of this is that everybody that's digging it out of the ground has in view that we've got to put it back. So we've got this integration between mining and rehab. We're just one team, it's not him and us, and that system for us, it works really well. And they take as much pride in the outcome as we do. I suppose the other thing about it, we have a really short lifespan of mines, so you might only be 4 or 5 years in the one place. So in view of that, you're going to want to go to another mine. If you don't get it right, you don't get to go to another one. So we're not fly in, fly out. We're lucky we live there. We can mine and live in these great places like Busselton and Bunbury. Backfilling, well, it goes back just as it comes out in exactly the same layers, and that's where mine planning is really important. We don't just get to the edge and push it in, it all goes back in layers, so you recreate exactly what was in there. Verification, we're obligated to do exactly what we said we were going to do in that IRMP. So probably about 5 test bits per hectare are dug, tested, and all the material in it is tested that it is the classification that it said it was going to be, and even down to your topsoil depth. The topsoil, well, that was stripped in 5 different categories, and that's location and landform, pre-mining land use, whether it was vegetated, whether it come out of a swamp, whether it come off the upland from the Bassendean sands, or whether it was really weedy. And all the topsoil is measured and surveyed down to the metre, and it's all allocated and planned to go and mapped back into exactly the same spot that it came from. There was no topsoil deficit at all on this site. And so just a few little things on the, as we develop going through the actual planting and side of it. This was our initial crack at it with the ripping. It wasn't very successful. We tried, you still had the non-fracturing between the rip lines, and the outcome was that a bit of rain and you lost any formation you gained from it. Then we developed the wing time. So if you look over there, that's it. What that does, that gives you this effect, and the mounds are about 500 mil high, so you've got quite a depression there, or a mound, whichever you're looking for. So up in the higher, drier basandine sands, you plant at the bottom, the wetland you plant on the top. It gives you that ability to collect any water at all that's dropped. So it just directs it to where you're planting and seeding. It also creates a bit of a microclimate. You get that really hot, dry weather, and you've got this plant protected in there and your seed germinating in there as well. So we found since we've been doing that, we've had a much better success rate. Our fencing, everything's fenced. It's all fenced off into annual blocks. At the end of the project, we fenced everything into cadastral boundaries. All the native veg is fenced out from the agricultural land. Being near the state forest and a lot of farmers, there's foxes everywhere, there's rabbits everywhere, and there's roos everywhere. So the fencing and baiting and pest control are really critical. Weed control, we use the helicopter a lot. And the reason we do that is in the wetland, when we're doing our prep, you just can't get in there, after which we can get in with selectives to get the grasses out. But also a lot of hand spraying. With the soil biology, that's something we might be able to get Guy to help us with. We're really big on it. I really believe it. I think microbial activity in your soil is just critical. We use Bactivate, we use mycorrhizae, we use solutions, we put them out. We think they're great, but we've got no data. But what we have got is less disease, better response. I'll just have to fly through these if I'm 5 minutes. Got a 4-minute video I want to show you, so. Look, we batch everything up into quarter hectares. Typically there's 2,000 plants a hectare and 5 to 6 kilos of seed. That just helps. That gives us a pretty good result. We outcompete any weeds that want to have a crack at us. These are some of the results. This is a roadway which was mined through, and that's it reinstated and put back. This is the wetland. You can note there you've got the ponds in there. So that's just a progression of how it went. This is another area up at the end. You'll see it in the video. You'll see this at the end. If you have a look there, there's a sign. That sign's about there, which was installed later on. This is the same thing. That's just this here. You've got this tree here is the same tree. That's remnant veg. This is rehab. It's the same place. So I guess our lessons learned. Our focus is always on the planning and assessing all the risks before you even start, having an idea what you're going to end up with. In our case, we're miners, so the soil's always disturbed. We have to understand it and know what we're dealing with and what we've got to come up with. I think just the threats are the big thing, and engaging the non-environmental personnel. We find that, if you've got that done, everyone's on the same page. We relinquish all these properties because everybody's with. We're not fighting the mining guys to get money or get jobs done. And the other thing is with us, we typically have a 10-year commitment once we've done it, so we're able to stay there, manage it, deal with issues as they come up afterwards. We better put this video on, I'm going to run out of time. This has still got the crystal lady, but anyway, sorry about this.
everybody. It's nice to be here. Thanks for having me. Hopefully in this graveyard shift, either everybody will be asleep or no one will be asleep, but we'll see how we go. I'm here to talk about Breeding Australia and a little bit about what we do, a little bit about our major programs, and a high-level overview about the need to scale up and how we're setting about doing that. So firstly, just a quick little bit about Breeding Australia itself. We're one of Australia's largest environmental NGOs. We have about 150 staff across the country. And we like to think that we tackle some of Australia's biggest environmental challenges. And we try and use the best science and the best people to do that. And really, it's about returning life to landscapes and to achieve some sort of balance in the environment. So our vision is healthy and productive landscapes where people and nature thrive. It's really fantastic to see people in the room here today, some who worked with Breeding Australia in the past, some who are currently working with us today, and some people who are help providing the science to guide us in our work. So in the last year or two, we've spent some time trying to assemble all of the disparate activities that we do into 5 national programs. Our organisation is over 35 years old, and we've spent a lot of time doing a lot of different things. But we realise that we need to try and communicate that a bit better, and that makes sense to our external audience. So what you can see there is that we have 5 national programs, and they're all trying to achieve impact at scale. It's not really about outputs for us, and not even so much outcomes, it's about the impact that we make. So you can see up on the coast in Queensland, it's about reef aid. We are well aware that climate change is the #1 threat to the reef up that way. The second greatest threat to the reef is around water quality. So our job in solving that is restoring gullies and improving the water quality that hits the reef. We have another substantial program down in Tassie, and really that's just a large, broad-scale habitat restoration program, but it's motivated around a few threatened species down in Tassie in particular. So Tasmanian devils, eastern quolls, eastern bettons and the like. We also have a program across our cities in Australia called Nature in Cities, and that really speaks directly to some of the content you saw from Julian this morning. How do we hang on to biodiversity in our cities? Us as an organisation, we're probably not quite set up to deal with the human health elements of that, but nature, biodiversity and humans benefiting from that, how do we keep that in our cities? We also have a bit of a cross-cutting theme as one of our programs, which is Thriving on Country, and that lines up really well with some of the stuff that Luke was talking about earlier. It's about genuinely understanding and benefiting from the knowledge that Aboriginal Australia has to offer, and also increasing capability and capacity for our Indigenous communities to manage land. But what I want to talk to you today about is Great Southern Landscapes. So this one really encompasses the traditional things that you may think of when you think of Breeding Australia, that is ecological restoration, planting trees and habitat and land management. And you can see that it occupies a pretty decent area of the country. So what is Great Southern Landscapes all about? It's an integrated program. We wish to integrate large-scale restoration, revegetation and carbon sinks into Southern Australia's agricultural systems. And that's for 3 main things. It's for threatened species, so what that means really is wildlife and habitat. It's for agricultural resilience. We want to see resilient, regenerative agriculture and stable enterprises in our farming country. And it's also for climate as well. So it's about mitigation of climate change and understanding what to do in a changing climate. Now some of those things may seem distinct, but really what we're hoping to do is find the co-benefits or the win-win that might be achieved in the centre of that Venn diagram there. If we do some of these things correctly, we can tick all of the boxes and really find some genuine solutions. So if we look at our Great Southern Landscapes program area that Breeding Australia is focusing on, the question you might ask is, well, how much habitat or how much vegetation is actually needed? So we're trying to take a really long-term view of all of this and actually throw out some big numbers. Prior to bringing together this program, we did a bit of looking globally and nationally about what sort of dialogue was going on around these subjects, around habitat loss and the need for restoration. globally there seems to be a really healthy and rich dialogue around this. Some of it's coupled to climate change, but even just for biodiversity and habitat itself. There are very large NGOs, there's organisations like the UN, and they have very specific targets, and they're very large aspirational targets. And then we look nationally, and there was virtually nothing. There was a genuine vacuum there in what our country needs and how big it needs to be. So I think what we're doing is deciding that at least as an organisation, we need to say something and start putting the message out there. So in that program area that you can see on the bottom left there, that's actually 100 million hectares in size, and really that encompasses our southern agricultural landscapes and cuts out where the dry tropics start to cut in, and the rangelands for that matter. It's widely acknowledged that we need about 30% of native vegetation in the landscape. If we have that much in the landscape, we can see that populations like woodland birds will persist. We can see that you retain benefits and stability in your agricultural enterprises. So rather than being overly precise about what the magic number is, we've decided that 30% would be a really fantastic goal to kick this off with. If we want to do that, that's 8 million hectares that would be required to top up all of those little cells and tessellations you can see there. That's what's required to get us back to 30% across the board. I think that's probably a little bit of a tall order for GA, but it's a national target that we might seek to entertain. If we think about something over the next couple of years then, let's say 2030, what might be a rational target? Nationally, in Australia, we should probably aspire to reintroduce 1 million hectares back into that landscape. And it's actually doable when you look at some of the progress that people are making with restoration at scale at the moment. So Greening Australia had a bit of a look at, well, how much of this restoration and rehab do we do in the regions? And it equates to about a third at the moment. So let's call it 300,000 by 2030. Sounds suitably aspirational, but doable to us. In doing that, we want to split that up amongst a couple of primary themes. So wildlife habitat is core to us. There are a range of fauna assemblages and threatened species that would benefit specifically from habitat restoration as opposed to amelioration of other threats. And we would like to do that in strategic locations to re-establish connectivity. So Gondwana is a very obvious example. We also want to see enhanced agricultural land across the country. So we're not just doing this for threatened species. This is, after all, about people and nature. So we want to see a large degree of enhanced agricultural land as part of this effort. If you do all of that, if you re-establish 300,000 hectares, we can actually generate 4.5 million tonnes of CO2 sequestration, and that's a significant dent in Australia's targets, CO2 mitigation targets, even though that's quite a hot topic at the moment. And you can also see on that map the degree of fragmentation or the degree of environmental impact that we have. So it's worth pointing out, given that we're in WA, that big red blob in the wheat belt basically means that we take the prize for intensity of land disturbance, hence us being a global hotspot. So how is Greening Australia going to scale up and get anywhere near that 300,000 hectare target? First of all, we need to do a lot better job in the planning, how we go about this sort of stuff. And we need to do that at multiple scales. So Greening's starting to align itself with some of those global movements that I talked about, some of that global conversation. So you can see there that there's the Sustainable Development Goals up in the right that the UN's put out. We're selecting and aligning ourselves with those goals and quantifying how we can contribute to those. But we're also signing up and being part of some global initiatives like the Bond Challenge. So you can see there the Bond Challenge states that 150 million hectares of the world's deforested or degraded land will be put into restoration by 2020 and 350 million by 2030. So all of a sudden 300,000 hectares doesn't sound so big. But we're needing to do that at a national and regional scale as well. So we're investing a fair amount of our time and drawing together expertise to do spatial modelling and some very specific strategic planning to understand how we can get best bang for buck. Where do we need to go to make the best impact? So on the right there you can see maps on the top that are indicating species richness of those species that will specifically benefit from restoration or habitat recreation. And then importantly for us, where can we generate some carbon? How can we actually find a market that will help us enhance and further the efforts that we need to undertake? We're also undertaking prioritisation just to understand how much things cost for us. So in a very operational sense, where is it cheaper to do re-veg and still get the equivalent ecological benefits? Or where best should we go to undertake biodiversity or carbon offsets to meet those demands? And then finally, some more scientifically intensive things. How do we retain ecological function in particular systems? So we've been working with Arthur Ryler over in Victoria, looking at the Gippsland lakes. How do we retain connectivity in the face of climate change when we see lakes that may be either receding or going salty and the like? How do we deal with that? This is some of the planning that we're undertaking at regional scales. It's really just that we need to examine ecological connectivity. We need to understand the value of remnant vegetation that's there. And some of those things that you can see there relate to the ecological factors, but we also need to incorporate cost and social modelling in there as well. One of the biggest constraints Greening Australia has, or most relevant variables, is how the people that we work with are going to deal with or be receptive to what we wish to undertake. And then finally, we've got the local planning. So it's amazing to see the planning and the sophistication from our last speaker in the revegetation. We'd desperately love to have some of those toys and helicopters and things. But nonetheless, what really underpins our strategic planning at that base level is working with our stakeholders. So we must have land managers, landowners, our supporters, putting their point of view, putting their needs and desires right in at the front end. If we don't do that, we're not going to get anywhere. And in doing that sort of thing, we need to start operationalising some of the science. So a few of you might have heard of SERA, or the National Standards for Ecological Restoration. That's really underpinning everything that we do now. It's a very clear chain of logic that at the front end says, this is what I want to do, and here is my perceived end goal. And that's the only way you're actually going to be able to track and say, did I get there in the end? If you don't implement a procedure like this, you're essentially just gardening. And we're also undertaking some very specific planning within the study areas based on landform types, based on future land use and the rest of it. I just wanted to add that direct seeding is an absolute game changer for us. It's been around for a little while now, but prior to that we were spending a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of labour on tube stock planting. And since the switch to direct seeding, that's really unlocked the ability for us to go big. Rather than having teams of people on the ground, we can get 10 hectares done very easily with a single person. So on the south coast, for example, this year we're planting about, I think it's about 1,000 hectares, which we're quite proud of. We'd really like to acknowledge a lot of the work that's gone into direct seeding. It's not just us, there's some key partners that we've had for a very long time. Jeff Woodall is one who's in the picture there. But we're continuing to further the science around this as well. So there are some very key things around direct seeding that are frustrated. We have very difficult species that may not wish to germinate. We have mechanical issues with our direct seeders. So we're collaborating with the likes of Kings Park and others in some innovation funding to further develop the science there and really get a whole lot more reliable in the way we go about things. And these are the sorts of pictures that excite me. So that's what re-veg at scale looks like. That one there is I think it's a 2-week-old jarrah forest, so it's not quite done yet, but you get the idea of how big things can be. This particular one was an offset. It was about 400 hectares, and it was for those 3 specific species. So there was the introduction of specific habitat nodes for foraging flora species for the Carnaby's cockatoo, for example. The introduction of 1080 or gastrolobium thickets for additional secondary protection for the mammals, and a few other different specific habitat characteristics. And we do that across Australia in a lot of different ways. We have threatened frog species that we're catering for in the Gippsland wetlands in Victoria. We're implementing very specific wetland cells in areas just out of Melbourne for helmeted honeyeater and leadbeater's possum. So we're trying to get a whole lot more sophisticated around the fauna habitat characteristics that are needed to really support and have these things come back. That's just another example of re-veg at scale down on Kangaroo Island in South Australia. But if we just go back to that former example, the 2-week-old forest, this is a number of months afterwards, and we're seeing really good results, not only with some of the easy stuff like eucalypts, but some of the proteaceous stuff is coming back as well. And it's really pleasing to see just how you can achieve something at that large scale. Every bit of clear land you can see there will be Jarrah Forest or Wundu in the next little while. It's also important to note that for us, weeds are a significant thing. We know that. There's probably no real news to anybody, but it's important to note that in the short term, they actually play a bit of a service in keeping things covered and occupying the edge until our things mature and start to crowd them out, which does happen. Another before and after, because I can't help myself. This is in Gondwana link, so this is what it looks like in 2006. This is what it looks like in 2010. I'm not sure who took the carb on it, but somebody did. And this is what it looks like in 2015. I just want to add there to draw on from Luke's point about malleefowl being existent in their habitat, which is just down the road from here. While all of you were maybe doing something else at Easter, I was camping in the re-veg, yet again, because I can't help myself. But there was actually a flock of at least 300 Carnaby's cockatoos using the re-veg itself, not even the remnants. And I was thinking, wow, that's a really amazing fluke that that's there while I was camping. I went down there this week and back there again, so 2 from 2, maybe there's a real result there. I also want to just draw upon the fact that if we're going to do direct seeding and go big at scale with a method like that, we need to know a whole lot more about seed, and we need to control the supply chain that exists for that. This particular one you can see in the pictures here is a seed production area for Western Sydney. That's eventuated because of an offset, which is around the airport that they're building out there on the Cumberland Plain. The problem with the Cumberland Plain is we can't go out there and collect enough seed for the vegetation offset required for that, because there's not enough vegetation left. So we're needing to go and get the precious little seed that is there, and then turbocharge that through a seed production area, which will then enable the offset. So we're working with Infrastructure Australia on that one. That's about $10 million worth, so a real need to do something at scale there. I just want to have a quick little look at our agricultural system. So one example here in the wheat belt, some of you might know pretty well, is shade shelter fodder. It's a variation on a few that are out there at the moment, but really we term it as re-veg by stealth. It's a way to go to the farmer and offer them a good, productive fodder system that benefits their livestock, but we managed to sneak and cram a bit of biodiversity in as well, and so we're happy that we're rebuilding a bit of habitat. It is genuinely integrated with their enterprise, and it's designed with the landholders. It's done by direct seeding, so it is very low cost. You rest that for 2 or 3 years, and then you can actually recommence grazing, as long as it is managed grazing. We kicked that off with about 8 species that we thought were useful in an integrated system like that, and we're up to more than 70 species at the moment. So that biodiversity win is starting to happen. That's what it looks like now, after initially being a bare paddock. So a managed shrubby system. And finally, I just wanted to talk about something a little bit different, and it's about valuing native vegetation and biodiversity. It's about the concept of shared value. We tend to partition the bush versus farming and things like that, but what we really need to think about is the integration of them, and why these ecological or environmental things that we think about are actually important across sectors. So I might occupy that green arrow there. I'm a bit of a greenie. I'm interested in the shape of the bush that we plant. What sort of landscape context is there? What's the age of it? What's the composition? They're all ecological considerations, and they're all important. If I was a landholder though, I'd probably be thinking about some of those things in the middle. Am I actually going to get some pollination out of that bush that can help my crops? Is there shaded shelter for my stock? What's it doing for land degradation? Is it holding my soil? Is it giving me some of those ecosystem services? But the bit that's a bit of a brain melter for us, but something we need to move into, is the financial sector. So we're starting to talk to banks about this sort of thing. We're starting to talk about this with insurance agencies. What sort of productivity benefits can we get from having that bush back in there? What sort of reduced risk exposure? So instead of a degraded and risky farm that's very vulnerable to climate change and extreme events, we've got something that's resilient. It's the sort of farm that you might want to loan someone money for. You might give them a reduced interest rate loan because it's building for the future. So that concept of shared value is very important to us and is really dominating a new way for us to unlock mechanisms for going big. And finally, I just wanted to draw on something which I think is important when we hear a little bit about our conservation despair this morning. I want to bring you into a little bit more around conservation hope or restoration hope. So this is a bit of collective impact, and just a really nice example of it from Downing Gondwana Link. What you can see on the left there is what we're terming eco-cultural restoration. This was something that came to one of our traditional owners in a dream. He dreamed that he could weave his stories back into the landscape. He then had his cousin do some artwork for that. So he visualised his cousin's dream, and then they brought that to us and said, can you digitise that on GIS? And can you somehow get that into your little machine in the tractor? We want that on the ground. So it was Greening Australia's role to convert the culture, the meaning that these guys had in their dreaming, onto the ground and showing something. And then they came back with the tube stock and made it live as well. So a really nice story of technology transfer and collective impact. So you can see the utes on the right-hand side. That gives you an example of scale of what we've weaved into the landscape. So that's a totem that go in on one of our properties in Gondwana Link. There is also a mallee fowl and a yonga or a kangaroo on one of our other properties. And I was down there this week, so you're very lucky that we've got a sneak peek of what it's looking like now. So it's really starting to jump out of the landscape, and the meaning that that has for the traditional owners of that land, for the local Noongar guys, is really it's quite an impactful thing. So just to finish it up then, if we're going to go big with GA, if we're really going to make this great Southern Landscapes thing a collective effort, and we're going to succeed and also help catalyse others to come on the journey with us, we need to plan across those multiple scales, because that really allows us to get best bang for our buck. But we also need to work by collective impact. We need to have some sort of agreement and alignment on what we're doing and how we're going to do it. The shared value concept that I brought to you is a way for us to complement that typical environmental funding that is probably a past and declining paradigm with the new revenue streams that we seek to get from industry and business. And we also have to define our theory of change. So that's when we're talking about setting objectives at the front end and mapping out the why, the impact, and the outcomes that we seek to achieve. And then we must measure and report our progress to our investors. Really, you've got to do that in a scientific way, so Guy can sort that out for us. And then finally, we should embrace innovation, whether it be science. We should address our key knowledge gaps, and some of those key knowledge gaps are not always ecological, as that last inspiring example showed you. I think I might leave it there. Thank you.
I thought I'd take the opportunity today to talk to a broader set of environmental practitioners that we normally present to. We used to get very heavily trained with government and trying to share the messages based on data and evidence. And I thought this might be the right forum just to share some of what I think is success that we've had by direct offsetting rare plants. And it's heavily linked to one of our mine site approvals. So I'll sort of take a bit of a wide berth and then come in with a rush at the end just to show you that it's all about plants and attaining environmental outcomes. So a little bit about Mount Gibson iron. Yes, we do iron, but if anyone else has got another mineral, we're happy to look at it. We're a bit tired of iron, except at the moment the price is very buoyant, so there might be some more projects around. Two geographical footprints, both here in Western Australia. Mount Gibson, or MGX, is an ASX listed company, which is why we use the ticker MGX to describe ourselves. You can see there are two nodes of exploration. I'll just try and get the pointer. Here in the Mid-West, where there are three mining footprints, one at Extension Hill, one at Tallering Peak and one at the Shine Iron Ore Project. The third one is undeveloped. All of these are approved through ministerial statements for those who spend a lot of their professional life. We hold 5 ministerial statements in the Midwest for 3 mining operations and a rail site. And then the jewel in the crown, Koolan Island, known quite famously because BHP commenced mining there in the 1960s and then handed the site back to the state, not as complete as it was in 1963, in 1993, and then in 2006. A company called Aztec Resources, which was then acquired by Mount Gibson, went on to mine hematite from that site until 2014. Some people might have heard in the news, 2014 we had a seawall collapse, which was quite catastrophic in terms of our mining future, and it put the site on care and maintenance for 4 years, but last month we exported the first 65,000 tonne ore ship overseas. First time in 5 years, 67% iron, worth $150 a tonne. So, as I said, quite buoyant. So Mount Gibson mining, a fairly diverse footprint, so lots of physiographic settings here for us to deal with as enviros and risks to manage in terms of delivering compliance as we move through ministerial statements. More particularly in the Midwest, I'll talk specifically about the site at the Mount Gibson Range, the nameplate of the company, just coincidentally, where we have 2 hematite mine pits, one Extension Hill and Iron Hill. Now both of those just recently became exhausted with the resource, so we no longer mine, so the mines there have moved into a care and maintenance and full closure operation, which again from an environmental management perspective brings new challenges. In terms of the operation itself, direct shipping ore, DSO it's called, you blow it up, you dig it up, you haul it to the crusher, you crush it, you put it onto trucks. It's road hauled to Perenjori siding, where we have a ministerial statement at play there. And then it's railed through to Port of Geraldton, where we've got 2 storage sheds at berths 4 and 5. So that's a little bit operationally about the organisation. So it's just a practical setting that becomes a day-to-day reality for operation. So a little bit of a wide berth. Back in 2007, the first ministerial statement was approved on the Mount Gibson Range, and if you train your eye to the right-hand side, the development envelope is this green line work. Sorry. And you can just by eye detect the mine pit and then the waste dump just on the other side of the range. Now, I'll show you some oblique photos soon. The range basically is low and flat at the Great Northern Highway. This is a great example of just using the public to tell you whether you're complying or not by siting a mine directly next to a highway. There's no disguising, particularly when you're mining the bit that sticks out, which is a banded-eyed stone formation. And that's good. I mean, that just means we can't hide from these things. I mean, we can't in the modern world anyway because of remote technology. Cameras looking at us constantly upstairs, but it's a great position to be in where we have to be very open in terms of our operation and our actual impact. So in Ministerial Statement 753, there are a number of indirect offsets that were applied to account for the significant residual impact to declared rare flora species. There are only 2 DRFs that occur on the Mount Gibson Ranges. They're really not found anywhere else. Darwinia masonii is one of them, and it's not found anywhere else on the face of the earth. There were 22,000 records of it on the range, and there's probably something like 25,000 records now in existence because of our translocation and offsetting effort. So DRF don't make up the full picture, they're only one of the factors that go into a ministerial statement and approval. So, in 2007, Statement 753 said you can operate. Mount Gibson Mining went in to pull hematite off the ironstone formation, crushed it, put it onto the loadout and took it down to peremptory siding, and that ran for 8 years and exported 15 million tonnes through Geraldton Port. Then in 2014, we realised that we were running out of hematite at Extension Hill and that we better get cracking if we wanted another approval for a satellite pit, craftily named Iron Hill. I don't know how the geos do it actually, they're wonderful names. In fact, in the 1960s, in early exploration, this was the first ore body identified, and a larger resource, an extension, was then found to the north. So go figure, I mean again, Iron and Extension Hills, not much behind the scenes. In December 2016, Ministerial Statement 1045 was approved with a very modest development envelope of 112 hectares, of which we could directly disturb, or indirectly for that matter, 87 hectares of it. And the Iron Hill project had a very short project life because only 8 million tonnes of hematite, so at a rate of about 4 million tonnes a year. And those numbers for anyone else in mining here are incredibly modest. They are small amounts, but this ore is very good quality, so it's north of 62%, so, and relatively low in impurities. So I'll just tell you a little about the two declared rare flora that were part of the ministerial statement. As I said, Darwinia masonii. There are lots of Darwinia in Western Australia and even throughout Australia. Masonii is only found on the Mount Gibson Range. And it's duly listed under the State Act. This is an old slide, so I say Wildlife Conservation and the EPBC Act. Lepidosperma, when it was recorded in botanical surveys on the Mount Gibson Range, was unknown, was thought to be its own species, so it was called Lepidosperma spurt Mount Gibson for a long time, and then craftily they just changed spurt Mount Gibson to Gibsonii. It's a low-growing sedge. Lepidosperma is, as a genus, very common as well, but Gibsonii only on the Mount Gibson Range and on the plains to the west of the range itself. There are about 70,000 records of Gibsonii that are known. Okay, so here are all the dots. People in the room would be more adept at me at reading figures like the one on the right. As I said, and I like to keep things pretty simple in tables and graphs. The table points out the sum total of the earlier Extension Hill approval accounted for 17% of the known population of the Darwinia. And when we move towards Iron Hill, you can see that the take of Darwinia is very small, but in total amounted to about a quarter of the known records. Less impact on Lepidosperma gibsonii. So the two species actually don't co-occur in space very often. The Darwinia sits right on top of the Ironstone Ridge, and the Lepidosperma sort of hangs out on the southern side and the cooler slopes. But you can see at a glance that there are both white dot Darwinia and blue dot Lepidosperma occurring in the development envelopes for these two mining projects. So the sum total is that we had a bit of a fight on our hands in terms of both the direct impact to DRF, which made us in an assessable development, a PER level of assessment, so a 2-year process just to work through. Extension Hill was more like 4 years for it to be referred and then approved, whereas Iron Hill, this bit more latterly in 2014 to 16 was a 2-year process of approval. So if we go to the original statement 753 conditions, it said the proponent shall implement the offset package outlined in the schedule, and one of those things was to support a research program by BGPA. And the numbers are a matter for public record. We spent a lot of money for BGPA to successfully generate knowledge, information, data about those two DRF. This was at a time where little was known about how or whether you could manage this species. So investment was made through the indirect offset mechanism. Money went to, I think there are 6 offsets, and from the top of my head, the majority of them involve investment of money in attaining conservation outcomes for the district and the region that we're in, including the largest single tranche of funding, which was to BGPA to understand the science of these two DRF. One of the best things that happened in that early work was that there was a trial translocation plot of Darwinian Masoniite made, and you can pick the reticulation here. So what was found was that the plants could be generated from cuttings from adult plants. They could be grown up from clones in the nursery, and then they could be translocated back into the field, so that after 10 years, we still had 80% survival of a plot of 200 plants that we put in. And this was absolutely critical as evidence to the EPA, and we had EPA board members there who could literally admire the plants. They're not a particularly pretty plant. They've got a lovely belled flower, of course, but they're not a pretty plant to look at. It's a pretty harsh landscape that we're in on ironstone formations in the Midwest. But the signs were clear, and they were very good, that we could apply a process, a technical process of taking, cloning and returning the plants, as long as you hold all the right permit, back into the wild. And that was done as a research outcome from the original indirect offset. And here's just some of more of that evidence. So a bit more of a close-up of the first translocation plot, and then 10 years on, evidence of these little germinants, sort of second generation, growing outside of the plot fence, showing that the next generation is coming through. Now, Darwinia responds to fire, and we certainly haven't had one, so there's very low sort of rate of germination of these seeds to give new plants roaming off into the wild themselves. We don't want a fire, not yet. I'm sure one will come, and when it does, we think the seed bank is good and we'll be ready. But you can see in the photograph on the left, just the little cutting that was taken from an adult leaf and the extent of the root system that could be struck. So we really just got lucky that we had a species that would respond to this treatment, because there are other mining projects even in play at the moment where there are concerns about the ability of the plants, the DRF, to respond in this way. Really? Okay. So we get to 1045 and 2016. So EPA or Minister's condition now says, don't spend money on research. Counterbalance the significant residual impact on those two DRF by replacing in the field what you're permitted to take. And we said, May, we'll do double that. And they said, no, just do 1 for 1. 1 for 1. So remember years ago there were discussions around what factor do you rate it up by. So 1 for 1, we took from the source adult stock that we bowled over, and we took them off to the nursery, we applied the formula. And these are photos on the right of both. Sorry, these are all Darwinian. And what we've tried to do is establish them in old exploration disturbance. Disturbance from the 60s and 70s that never really quite has come back. So we're putting Lepidosperma and Darwinia back into mapped habitat, which was previously disturbed, that we now want to restore with the same genes. I won't skip through that. These are here's a shot of a very handsome Lepidosperma. Reticulation, little drippers, and if you just kick the water up to them for the first couple of years, they kick along. We've got it fenced because animals will come in and chew the drippers off. They won't touch the plants, but they love to build water. And this just shows, this top one's sort of informative because we mapped, you know, the geology, the regolith, the topography. You build up a model and you say this is the hit zone. The green shrouding is the area that we've mapped Darwinia and Lepidosperma in. So we say as long as we're in that mapped habitat, we think we can have successfully have translocation plots. So here we are, water tanks, pumps. We've got to run trucks up there to top them up every couple of weeks. We apply a little bit of water, not over water, just judicious. It's like raising a child. You just want to do the right amount. You don't want to get too intrusive. Don't want them fat and lazy. They need to adapt. They need to adapt and grow into their natural habitat. Some of the plots, they don't know it, don't tell them. They're not getting water next summer. Some of the plots we've watered for 3 years, that we think that's enough. So we're starting to turn off the water so that the plants fatten up. These are just photos to show how we went through some other trials. That's a waste dump in that before on the left-hand side. So we directly planted Darwinia, and then 3 years on, here they are, no tree guards on the waste dump, and other vegetation coming up around them on a rehabilitated waste dump. I just want to show you this one on Lepidosperma. 2017 on the left-hand side, 100% survival because we brought them from the Carnup nursery where it's lovely and sun shines every day. We had a lot of death initially, the orange, a lot died off really quickly. We topped them back up, and with time, and we should have progressed about 2 years along that x-axis, we've still got over 60% survival. So we have 1,700 plants alive. We only had to replace 867, remember, 1 for 1. So we're tracking over 200% of the target. Now it's early days, we've only been doing this for 2 years. Let me come back in 5 years' time and hopefully be able to say, yes, we more than exceeded the 100% and we're still tracking at 200%. Closing remarks. So we've applied direct offset. So this is where you literally have an impact on factors like significant species, DRF in this case. You dive in, you do the science on the species themselves, you work up an applied method to counteract that loss. And we think at the moment, when we map it, we can show not only have we got increased species abundance of those DRF across the range, they're in mapped habitat where they didn't occur before, so their area of occurrence is actually larger. And we're backfilling into otherwise neglected rehabilitation of historically disturbed lands. There have been many tenement holders in the Mount Gibson Range, and we know that there's a lot of disturbance that we didn't account for, but we're more than happy because we're adding to the restoration of not just the DRF themselves, but the habitat that they occur in. So I think there are probably few examples of direct offsetting through EPA's offset policy, and I think that this is one of them where, at the species level, we're doing it practically. I think it's acceptable. It's been done without the use of contributory offsets. For Iron Hill, we do not place a cent, much to the chagrin probably of some in this room, with NGOs or other conservation managers who can do other good work, but we're not doing that for Iron Hill. still do it for Extension Hill, even though we're not mining there anymore. We still do it for Extension Hill. We do contributory offsets, but in this case, direct offsets are being done and they're being approved through Part 4 by the EPA. Thanks. Any questions?
Every year, hundreds of volunteers across Australia, they put on high-vis clothing, hats, hardy boots, full clothing in fact, long sleeves, long trousers, gloves. We put on gloves. We take smartphones with Cyber Tracker program, and we take GPS units, we take clipboards, 2 litres of water, and we trudge through the bush in the searing heat of summer in remote areas of Australia to find, monitor and assess these things. They're called malleefowl maps, and I'm going to spend this talk telling you why. Why do we do this? Why do we, and who's involved? First of all, I'd like to ask how many of you that have seen one of these birds? Yay, that is amazing. Gosh, that's good, because these are elusive birds. They will let you see them when they want to, and they won't when they don't. And they are in our environment. They have persisted in our environment, where a lot of the other native animals have not. This is a megapode. It is one of 3 in Australia. This is the only one, and it's an amazing one, that it lives in arid areas. One of the reasons we want to monitor the mounds is because we want to find out how they're doing. And one way to measure that is through looking at their nests and how many there are. The reason why we want to do that is because they are, across Australia, and despite their range, which is actually quite broad across Australia, they are vulnerable. Now, malleefowl build mounds they are unusually in the building of their mounds, in that this is how they incubate their eggs. Those of you who know the malleefowl will know this. This is why they're megapodes, and the composting that they put in the middle of that mound is, and they wait for a rainfall event, is then covered over, and that is what is used for warmth for those eggs. Now, the other reason we want to know is about these birds is because 60 days later, this is what happens at the mound. This chick comes out fully feathered, and within 24 hours it is in the trees. But in the first week we lose about 50% of these. And while the bird itself is particularly resilient, the chicks, obviously, as you can see, are pretty vulnerable. So I would like to also who's who in the malleefowl zoo. I also want to tell you who's involved in doing this malleefowl monitoring, because while I'm not going to give you a comprehensive look at that today, I really just want to look at the organisations in Western Australia that have got malleefowl conservation role specifically. In WA, and one of the reasons I want to do this, one of the reasons I want to do this is because I think there's some confusion amongst environmental practitioners about who is who in WA when it comes to malleefowl conservation, because historically, since '92 until 2015, there was this group called the Malleefowl Preservation Group. They are no more. Then there's also, at the same time, there was a group called the North Central Malleefowl Preservation Group, also a community group. This also folded in 2017, as did This group was set up, the WA Malifaux Network was set up in 2007 to coincide with the national forum happening in Katanning, and this folded also in 2017. The reason why, and before I get to that, at the national level, so sitting at the national level, which is the organisation that I work for, is the National Malifaux Recovery Team. Now, as you can see, it's been going for 30 years. Now, the National Recovery Team is active in WA, but so is this group now. So we folded two groups in WA to form the WA Malifaux Recovery Group in 2017. In terms of who's who, these two groups in WA are who's who in the Malifaux conservation world. The WA Malifaux Recovery Group is a community group, and it is very new. And it has multiple stakeholders within it, so DBCA members, BirdLife, NRM, Greening Australia, Bush Heritage, Mining, and the National Malifaux Recovery Team. All of these stakeholder groups have their own Malifaux recovery projects. They all do conservation work. The objectives of this WA Malifaux Recovery Group are to promote Malifaux conservation through retaining habitats, raising awareness, and Malifaux mound monitoring. Now, going back to the beginning, the reason why we are doing Malifaux monitoring across Australia is to monitor, and this is the 2017 data, monitor as many mounds sites as we can. Now, Malifaux monitoring site, which is one of these red dots, is a place where there's a known amount of Malifaux mounds in an area that we have counted. We know where they all are. And we go in and every year we count how many of those mounds are active. And by counting how many are active, we get a sense of how the population is changing over time. Because if there's 5 active this year, that's 5 out of, say, 20 mounds. And we look at that over time and actually see that percent change in each site's populations. Now, in 2017, 106 sites across Australia were monitored, and that's 3,420 mounds. And I'm going to declare that this is probably the largest citizen science initiative across Australia in terms of scale, and in terms of the number of years it's been happening. This has been going on for about 20 years. Now, these sites are growing year by year, and one of the reasons I asked if any of you done anyone done Malifaux monitoring here? That's interesting. For those that haven't, come and see me afterwards, because I want you to sign up. Because I've got there's always an appetite. There's always, not an appetite, there's always a need for more citizen scientists to join us, because this is a large initiative and it relies on volunteers. So across Australia, this is the number of mounds that we monitor. And I just want to go back to actually look at the difference between the two groups that do this monitoring work, because the WA Malifaux Recovery Group, they were very much involved in the monitoring work, and they coordinate the monitoring program. Since they've been set up, they have actually been coordinating the citizen scientists that go out every year in WA, and there's the equivalent in other states, not all of them. They coordinate this Malifaux monitoring program. They also manage the WA volunteers and train people for the Malifaux monitoring work, and that's with the Cyber Tracker program and the GPS and actually the on-ground monitoring itself, and they engage community also. But what they also do is work with the other group. They work with the National Malifaux Recovery Team. In fact, there's a very close partnership between the two, because what happens to that Malifaux monitoring data that's collected is it goes into one database for the whole of Australia. This makes this citizen science monitoring really powerful in terms of the science that can be done with the data. So this is just a front page of the National Malifaux Monitoring Database, which all of the data across Australia gets into and gets crunched. In terms of the database, this organisation manages and sorts and I guess, talks about that data. So it's the National Malleefowl Recovery Team. So they manage this monitoring database. They report from this database, they can crunch those numbers, they report on the national malleefowl population trends. They employ, via the Malleefowl Recovery, the National Malleefowl Recovery Group, people like me. Now, I'm one of 3 people nationally that gets paid to do malleefowl work. Between us, we are 1 FTE, not even. So we are poor, but broad in the work we do. We also train people for malleefowl monitoring work and engage the community. And until 2017, as you can imagine, with these other groups winding down, we were actually caretaking what was happening in WA, which I think where the confusion has been coming from about who's who in the Malleefowl Conservation Zoo in WA. We also respond at the national level to the Environmental Protection Authority vegetation clearing and mining applications where malleefowl are seen to be at risk. And we implement the National Malleefowl Recovery Plan. One of the other things we do, which I want to touch on, is the Adaptive Management Predator Control Experiment. This is a broad, Australia-wide, southern Australia, where the malleefowl live, Australia-wide experiment looking at the impact of foxes, predators, on malleefowl populations. And this is done through a paired study. And it's done not by the national team, but through its partners. So we just project manage. But in fact, all those organisations, Bush Heritage, the Department of Biodiversity Conservation Attraction, all the NRMs are getting involved. We have, and there's a whole suite of other organisations that partner with us and set up pairs of pairs of sites where we control foxes or predators in one of those sites and we don't in the other, and then we look at the malleefowl mounds in both and actually look at the impact. So through the power analysis we've done to actually get how many of those do we need to actually make a decision about the impact of predators on malleefowl, and we need 20 of these paired sites across Australia, and these sites are up to 10,000 hectares each. So the question we're trying to ask through this adaptive management project is what is the impact of baiting, in this case it's fox baiting, on the fox populations, but more importantly, and as well, what is the impact of that on the malleefowl breeding activity, and we measure that through mound monitoring. Our cameras are put out through this project sites to actually give us an understanding of what is going through those areas. So that's how we measure fox populations. So it's to design an adaptive management experiment to learn about these two uncertainties. And it's actually quite important to understand because we know this bird is vulnerable and we want to prevent that in the future. And I think whenever everyone talks about, after vegetation clearing, which is obviously has occurred and malleefowl populations have shrunk. The second question you hear when people talk about, well, what is it affecting the malleefowl populations? It's usually, it's predators. This experiment is actually going to determine why, whether that is the case, because we're wondering if it is. So in terms of why we do this amazing sort of trudge through the country once a year through all of these sites with all of these volunteers, and is to actually determine what the population is. Now we need long-term monitoring sets as we've been talking about today to determine. So what we are learning through this monitoring work, through the effort of this citizen science program, where we have seen that across Australia there is a slight difference. So South Australia, we are seeing a significant decline in these birds. In WA, we are seeing a decline, but no clear trend in Victoria, and unfortunately limited data in New South Wales. But nationally, what we are able to say as a result of all of this is that malleefowl across the country is declining by 2 to 3% a year. From all of this, I'd just like a few key messages, and the first is that we have learned through citizen science monitoring and through the adaptive management work that we are doing as well, that Malifal are in decline, and we want to work out why. We also are proud of the Australia-wide Malifal monitoring that is occurring, and this is citizen science in action. And I've got a "we need you." I'm just going to hold my envelope up again. We need you, so come and sign up. If you do want to come and do Malifal monitoring, despite what I said at the beginning, it is actually great fun. You really enjoy it. But it's good. It's really enjoyable to be out there, and when you come across a Malifal mound that is active, and they're not all active, as I've been talking to some of you, there's sometimes you come across them a whole day's worth of mounds, and you can tell that they haven't been used for a long time. But when you do come across one that is active, it's actually really rewarding. And you occasionally see a bird. And the last thing I want to say is that despite the different roles of these two Malifal conservation organisations, and maybe some confusion about who needs to be worked with for Malifal conservation work, both groups, the WA Malifal Recovery Group and the National Malifal Recovery Team, they both support the goals of the National Malifal Recovery Plan, and both can be engaged with because they talk to each other closely. Thank you.